Pericles and Athens by A.R. Byrne, the golden age of Greece, seen through the life of our leading statesman. Spirit of a democracy. The democracy's haunted, apparently. Below the Acropolis, the daily life of Athens seethed and chattered. Down in the crowded streets, round the agora, the place of gathering, much more than merely a marketplace, where people from every part of the Greek world swelled the crowds of Athens, slaves and resident foreigners, and deputations for the empire waited wearily for the sovereign people to find time to deal with their business. As an anti-democratic pamphlet explains, the hard-worked council of 500 was suffering from some acute congestion of business. To begin with, the author remarks dryly, the Athenians have got more holy days to work through than any other state in Greece, and on all of these, both government offices and law courts are shut. One has to remember that Greece had no Sundays. Then the council had business connected with defense, finance, including the assessment and receipt of tribute, legislation, internal affairs, imperial affairs, pensions to war orphans, and prison administration. It had to see literally to the satisfactory condition of the temples and of the naval dockyards. It had also a good deal of judicial work to review, and if necessary, send a jury, magistrates' accounts, the examination of candidates for office before they were admitted to the draw, cognizance of unusual crimes, perhaps deciding which court should try them, and the hearing of appeals against their assessment by any of the several hundred rich men who in any year, as a regular part of the taxation system, were charged with a year's maintenance of a worship or the provision of a chorus for one of the festivals. It is quite true, admits our Athenian, as though in answer to a question, that while some foreigners are kept waiting for months, others, by paying bakshish, get their business done early. But no amount of bakshish, he adds, would alter the fact both council and courts have too much to do. Bakshish being Arabic for bribe. Meanwhile, Athens finds it highly profitable to have increases to have so many foreigners in town. Not only publicity, increases the landing totals at Pir Aas, but privately, it is good for trade, especially for people with lodgings to let, or transportation, or slaves for hire. It is a lively affair. This little anonymous pamphlet has come down to us among the essays of Xenophon, who was not born until about the time that Pericles died, but several points in it make quite clear that it was written within a few years of Pericles' death, and while the Athenian democracy and empire still stood as he left them. Possibly it might be by another Xenophon, a cavalry commander of Pericles' time, who was a general and was killed in action in 429 BCE. Its title is the Athenian Commonwealth. Its interest lies in the fact that it gives a contemporary Athenian hostile view of the democracy, and that in spite of himself, the author, an Athenian still, though no democrat, cannot withhold grudging administration of the efficiency with which Demas looks after his class interests. It gives us the best possible answer to the question whether Athens, and whose government aristocrats played so large a part, can really have been a democracy in practice. If we had only, say, Pericles' own view of the matter, we might suppose that he was idealizing. The evidence of this author, whom Gilbert Murray pleasantly christened the old oligarch, that the Athenians were altogether too democratic and instantly too soft for their slaves. It is the best possible evidence both for the democracy and for their kindliness. The essay is clearly meant for a foreign audience, perhaps originally an impromptu lecture to an aristocratic political club, with additions in reply to questions. This would account for being careless in style and loosely put together. Its tone is one of hard-boiled but light-hearted political realism, not yet soured by the strains and stresses of war, and its main thesis is that Demas knows very well what it is doing in all those democratic proceedings that look so queer to the governing class of Sparta or Thebes. Consequently, there is not a hope of overthrowing the democracy from within. I do not approve of the Athenian constitution, he begins, because by choosing it, they have chosen to give the rabble a better time than the decent folk. But since they have chosen it, I propose to show that they take sound measures to preserve their constitution, even in matters where the rest of Greece thinks they are going wrong. First of all, it is perfectly fair that the poor and the commons have advantages over the nobles and the rich, for this reason, that it is the people who row the ships and give the city its power, much more than the armored troops, and the nobles and the decent classes. For this reason, they think it is right that all should have an equal chance of office, by election or by lot, and that any citizen who wishes should have the right to speak in the assembly. They do not choose the generals and cavalry colonels by lot, for the people know that it is better for them that they should not hold these positions, but let those hold them who are best able. But they do seek to hold those offices which are concerned with pay and personal economic advantage. And if they're too soft on their slaves, well, make them not too soft on their slaves. Slaves should have certain rights. So too, in the council and assembly, if they let only the better citizens or upper classes speak or sit in the council, these people would devise measures in the interest of those like them, and not of the people. But as it is any low type who wishes to get up and devises what is best for himself and his like, they know very well that such a man's untutored cunning and loyalty will produce better results than the decent citizen's virtue and wisdom and disloyalty. A city so run may not be ideally the best, but that is how to preserve a democracy. For what the people want is not the best possible order with themselves in slavery, but freedom and control of the government. Disorder is a minor consideration. For the same reason, he goes on, reverting to the point 3 times in some 15 pages, the Athenian democracy backs up the proletariat and all the cities of the empire. For if the rich and the better classes prevail in the cities, the rule of the people will not last long at Athens. Now, a lot of people say the opposite. It's usually the poor who are good. And regardless of what is usually the case, the different economic classes and, of course, the races and stuff like that would, it varies who is the best person. And a lot of people even claim a religion that is a better religion than other religions. I mean, in a way of its ethics or what truth it claims or something, but they don't uphold enough of it for them to be better than someone who's not part of such religion by name. When Athens supported the best people, Boeotia, or at Miletos, he adds, or helped Sparta against the Messenians, the result was disastrous. One may remark that all these mistakes, belonging to the years before 450, Athens had learnt her lesson. There is a good deal of charm about the candor with which the old oligarch blows the gap about political realities. It is apparent that he would not have found much to surprise him about the politics of modern Europe. Among details, which he explains in passing, is the state organization of festivals and other amenities. Pericles, as we have seen, took a deep personal interest in this movement, which shared all that Greece had to offer of art and music with the average man. The old oligarch shows us that it extended to other amenities too. The people, seeing that poor men cannot individually afford sacrifices and feasts to build temples and have a fine and glorious city to live in, had devised the means to possess these amenities. The city, publicity, sacrifices many victims, and it is the people who divide up the meat and feast upon it. And athletic grounds, with baths and dressing rooms, are things which some rich men possess privately. But now the people builds for itself wrestling schools and dressing rooms and bathhouses, and the masses make more use of these than the well-to-do. Few. It appears that in this respect, if not in others, the Athenian democracy might be called socialist. Now, nowadays, I live in a country where the vast majority of the welfare is for the rich. 60% the entitlement or the unconditioned just handouts for rich people. And 22%, which is down from what the last president left us with, is unconditioned or indirect welfare. And wouldn't it be better to just cut the taxes down to a fifth and use that spare couple percent to improve the roads and schools and the welfare program for the poor? Maybe, possibly, and that's not even affecting the fact that half of the real government spending is war. Elsewhere, the writer refers, without details, to some legislation against private musical and athletic clubs, probably from fear that they might be used as cover for activities against democracy, and to the well-known systems of financing the great choral and athletic festivals by soaking the rich. He also explains the connection between democracy and the unparalleled freedom of satire allowed to comedy. They do not allow writers to satirize the people, that they may not hear gibes at themselves. And yet, Aristophanes is constantly mocking at Demos, and at once at least put an Athenian John Bull on the stage. But of individuals, let anyone satirize anyone, knowing quite well that the victims will not be, as a rule, men of the people, but somehow rich or aristocratic or powerful. Now, when it comes to slander or speaking ill of people, it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter whether it's the people or the individual. It's if it's not right, it's not right. But we're not going to tolerate it. We tolerate it for rich people and celebrities. That's not right, because it comes back around. It comes back around to the average person accusing people of things that they did not do. People have made all sorts of assumptions about me, at least since I was 13, that were just completely not true. Nobody ever claiming to be a witness of anything, but still people talk, and it's just not right. Um, it is rare for poor men or Democrats to be attacked, and when they are, it is generally for pushing themselves forward and trying to set themselves up above the people, so that no one is sorry when people like that are laughed at. It appears from an old commentator on Aristophanes that Athens did once, during the crisis of the Samian War, legislate to restrict the freedom of comedy, but the restrictions, whatever they were relaxed after a couple of years. Now, commentary can be a different matter, can it? But to us, the most striking detail in the pamphlet is certainly that about the treatment of slaves. Slaves and aliens are extremely undisciplined at Athens. You are not allowed to hit them, and a slave will not get out of your way. The reason is that if the law did not allow a slave to be struck by a free man, it would often happen that one struck an Athenian by mistake. For they are no better dressed and no better to look at. Say this idea is you go around and look at people, it's like, oh, I think you're slaves, I'm going to smack you. It's like, no, if you're going to smack anyone, it's got to be for far better reasons than that. Or, a valid reason. Lest we should idealize Athens unduly, it must be added that one must not forget the unhappy low-grade slaves who worked probably 10-hour shifts, as shown by the duration of their oil lamps, in the stifling shafts of the silver mines, and that if a slave was required to give evidence for a court of law, that evidence was given under torture. His master's permission, however, had to be given before the slave could be thus questioned, and it was frequently refused. It is clear from inscriptions, too, that many Athenians worked alongside their slaves, fluting pillars for the great temples, for example, or otherwise at the same work, and at least in an emergency, slaves, citizens, and hired men from the empire would row together in the fleet. And I would say that a right for slaves would be that a slave would, given a fair amount of work, not per se work to death, as you would call it. And somebody who would work alongside their slaves, that is a good sign. And the idea that you could torture, I'll let them torture you until you give whatever testimony. No. A good slave master would never do that. Slavery has a tone to it that a lot of moderns are not going to get. In terms of general, altogether, the old oligarch's picture agrees very well with the charming satire on democracy in Plato's Republic. Oh, and of course, I'm not saying that most slavery was clearly not justified, but because people fought wars for slaves, for example, and I strongly oppose that. Satire in Plato's Republic. There, too, we have the indigent testimony that slaves are no less free than those who bought them, and Plato adds, the extent to which domestic animals are freer there than in other states has to be seen to be believed. The bitch is as good as her mistress, as the proverb puts it, a bitch being a female dog. And the horses and donkeys, accustomed to march with all dignity of freedom, bump into the man who meets them in the street if he does not get out of the way. Anyone who has met a string of Greek donkeys on a mountain path or in a crowd will appreciate Plato's sentiments. There is the same anarchy as between old and young. The father tries to be like his child and is afraid of his sons, and the son like his father, and there is no respect or reverence for age. For the sake of freedom, and the old play down to the young and imitate them, so as to not be thought strict and unsupporting. Oh, and unsporting. Plato, it is true, belongs to the next generation and to a post-war age at that. But all that we hear of the youth of Alcibiades, who was brought up in Pericles' household, suggests that the modern spirit, which Plato notices among bright young people, was well developed already. Women, too, jeers Plato, are on equality with men. It is rather surprising that he should object to this, since it is a feature of his own ideal republic. Moreover, it was not a feature of life at Athens, where women were married off at adolescence to husbands of 30, and had next to no education and no political rights. While 30 is considered as an ideal for men round the world, so that is, I mean, even today it holds on because the peak of virility, I mean, but the lack of choice in marriage, that definitely is a serious issue. That continued for most of my country's history, is forced marriage, men and women, was perfectly legal. But it was, one may notice, in Athens, not least in Plato himself, that Greeks began to discuss the question of equality between the sexes, and the fact that Aristophanes devoted 3 of his 12 extant plays to women in Parliament, are cognate subjects, shows that feminism was a live issue, a theme at least for jokes within his lifetime. Now, rights for women and feminism is not necessarily the same thing. Equality doesn't equate to a war of the sexes or anything that you would need feminism to address. The whole place is full to bursting with liberty. Plato sums up, and people get so touchy that if the slightest restraint is applied, they make an outcry and consider it unendurable. In the end, as you know, they will not even obey the laws. He has already commented that if you want to hold any position in a democracy, and there is a law that disqualifies you, that is nothing to stop you. No doubt, he is thinking of the laborer class at Athens, who, if they stood for the archonship, were merely written down as small holders. Yet even Plato, for all his irony, feels, like the old oligarch, a certain affection for the democracy of his youth. He makes the democratic state much more attractive than any of the other faulty cities, which he describes as a foil to his ideal republic. Though in his scheme of things democracy is a worse form of constitution than capitalist plutocracy, which in turn is worse than feudal aristocracy. And his typical democratic man, who flits with engaging versatility from enjoyment to austerity, or from philosophy to soldiering, is simply the democratic Athenian drawn from life. And we see similar ways of how people of my country talk about other countries. And one of these things is that even if they're better to women, they're better to their prisoners, they're better to illegal aliens, or maybe there's not that concept in that country, but safer domestically, better sense of well-being. But they're a bunch of obscenity half the time too, and it's like, well, maybe it's your country, maybe it's your city that is the garbage place to live in. Athens, too, was not only a focus for radiating the city's own contributions to civilization, she was also continually receiving and welcoming influences from abroad. The years of Pericles' supremacy were the early years of the age of the Sophists. Sophos being the Greek word for wise. Sophos? I'm not sure which pronunciation we're looking for. Being the Greek word for wise, are in the old sense of the English word cunning. The verb sophizo is meant to profess wisdom. Sophizo? Yeah, sophizo sounds right. Are to make war. Are to make as the Americans say, put you wise. A sophistes had meant in earlier times an exponent of any form of cunning or specialized knowledge. It was now coming increasingly to mean an exponent of higher education and sort of professor. Now, sophistry becomes what we think of. You got fanaticism as the misassociation of the spiritual sense, sophism as the misassociation of the mental sense, and the physical sense would, of course, be oppression. Well, the physical manifestation of, bad ideas. The continued dissemination of philosophic and scientific ideas had created a demand from a considerable public, chiefly young men of the leisure classes, for information as to what it was all about. Simultaneously in Sicily, where democracy on the Cleisthenic model was established at Syracuse, I'm not sure, about 470. Men had started to study methodically the art of speaking, increasingly important in the new democratic law courts and assemblies, how to turn a sentence rhythmically and pleasantly, and above all, how to make the most of the strong points in a case and gloss over the weak ones, since the new scientific ideas were lethal to a literal belief in the Olympic gods in the old mythology. Since the ethics deduced by some people from the new philosophy amounted to maintaining the law of the jungle was natural, and the laws of the state only conventional, since the purveyors of the new knowledge found their best-paying pupils among young aristocrats, interested in holding their own amid or against the rising tide of democracy, and since their livelihood depended on popularity and quick results, the sophists soon acquired a rather sinister reputation. This was unjust to several of the best and most famous of them, such as Gorgias of Leontinoi in Sicily, who came to Athens in 427 in connection with the renewal of the old alliance, or Protagoras from Abdera on the Thracian coast. But it was true that both these intelligent and honorable men had deduced, from the diverse results so far attained by philosophers, philosophic views of their own, which amounted to far-reaching skepticism as regards ethics. It is from the alleged teaching of the sophists that a young rip in Aristophanes derives the view that it is what the animals do, and therefore natural, and therefore right and proper, that he should beat up his old father as soon as he is strong enough. Alcibiades, Pericles' ward, brilliant and unscrupulous, is the typical product of Athens in the New Age. Athenian citizens had other things to do than to become sophists, but the age of reason was affecting Athenian public life nonetheless. And I guess one of the problems that people reasoned out whatever. People wanted to fill in the blanks and just came up with the doctrines, trying to reason them out. new dramaticist, had made his debut in 455 BCE, and was now second only to Sophocles in popular favor. Like the early Shah, he at once enthralled and infuriated his audience by his use of new ideas, by his psychology, especially of women, which some people thought morbid, by his realism, his use of rags and dirt, for example, in dressing characters reduced to slavery or other adversity. This shocking people very much like realism in a modern production of a play on a sacred subject, and by his use of sophistic tricks in the set debates between his characters, which he was fond of staging. This was Euripides. There was a grave, thoughtful man beginning to be known in politics. A relation of the exiled Thucydides, but a supporter of Pericles, who prided himself on power to see things objectively, and when the people got into a panic about an eclipse of the sun or moon as a portent of divine displeasure, remarked dryly that it was curious that these things only happened about the turn of the month, or at the full moon respectively. He was Thucydides, the historian. There was an ugly, snub-nosed, strongly built man of working class origin who combined a devastating power of destructive criticism with a conviction that there must be a basis for morality somewhere. He was beginning to be popular with the bright young men who learned his tricks and took them home to try out on father. This was Socrates. All of these three were products of the Cleisthenic democracy, for Euripides, as well as Socrates, was of lowly origin, and Thucydides would have been excluded by the citizenship law of 451 had it been passed earlier. He was of noble descent, but one of his great-grandmothers, the mother of Cimon, was Thracian. And so let's work on our philosophical discourse, shall we?